Hey everybody, what's up and welcome back to the Starcraft 2 Own It Shack. It's David here bringing you another hotkey tutorial, and I know it's been such a long time since I made one of these, but because I have a little bit of time here on this nice Friday morning, I will be bringing you this tutorial on how to effectively use Mech hotkeys. So this is going to be a basic sort of rundown of how I organize and hotkey my Mech units in any matchup, Terran versus Protoss, Zerg, and obviously the mirror. Now, just a little disclaimer before I get started here. This is obviously by no means the only way to hotkey your Mech units. There are plenty of different strategies. This is simply the one that I have become most familiar and comfortable with after playing quite a number of Mech games in my Starcraft 1 and Starcraft 2 career. So, to get started here, as you can see, Mech Army has a ton of different units. There's Ghosts, Siege Tanks, Vikings, Thors, Hellions, all that good stuff. This is most typical of what you'd see in a Terran versus Protoss army. If you were to look at, a Terran versus Terran army, then sure, you'd have maybe a Raven in there as well. And same with Terran versus Zerg. Now, this doesn't change the general hotkey setup. It's the same for every single one. Now, the first most important thing, in my opinion, that you have in a Mech Army hotkey setup is that your siege tanks are on their own hotkey. For me, I get my siege tanks, control them, control click, hotkey them to 2. The reason I use 2 for my siege tanks is actually because you can siege and unsiege very comfortably, I find, with 2, because your middle finger, at least mine, rests very nicely on the 2 hotkeys. So I can 2E if I want to siege all the tanks, there they go. And similarly, 2D, it's like pretty much right next door. So this makes like sieging in a real pinch. If all of a sudden you see the army coming, you can simply 2E, and you're not going to be caught unsieged. If you don't have your siege tanks on their own hotkey, then what happens, as you can see, if you have something like a Ghost in the mix, oops. What happens is the Ghost or Raven or any tech unit, basically, that's higher up the tech tree than the siege tank will gain priority. That means that you have to tab then siege, and that's very slow, so you can be caught unsieged. Basically, this is the most important aspect of Mech hotkeys, in my opinion. Keep your siege tanks hotkeyed to 2, all of them on the same one. Now, the next most important is probably your tech units. These are things like Ghosts. Now, obviously, we don't frequently have Ghosts and Ravens in the same army, but they do take the same hotkey, so it's not really a problem. And obviously, Terran versus Protoss, you're going to want to have your Ghosts on hotkey 4. And if it's Terran versus Terran, your Ravens on hotkey 4. The reason I like to use 4 for my tech units is actually because there's a lot of free hotkeys around 4 that you can use for the spells. I do not use the standard spell setup for my spellcasters. I have switched some of them. As you can see, EMP it's right now on E, but typically I will have EMP as R. I switched that to R, so ignore this. I do suggest you switch it to R if you're using 4, since you can simply middle finger 4, index finger R, and EMP very quickly. But another important one is Snipe. I have that to R right now. Typically I'll use that, change that to T. So yeah, it's up to you. The point is, you always want to be in a position where you can quickly use your middle finger to tap the hotkey, then R or T or something with your index to hit the spell. Same goes for the Raven. However, the Raven's hotkey setup is somewhat, ideal already. You can quickly use, T for your turrets if you have the Raven on 4, as I'm going to do right there. Point defense drone's a little clunky on D, so you might want to consider changing point defense drone to R. However, Seeker Missile is defaulted to R, so it depends which one you use more. Obviously, if you're like me, you use Point Defense Drone a lot more than you use Seeker Missile, so it's going to be up to you. Generally speaking, you don't want to be having hotkeys in the second row of letter keys on your keyboard, for your spells at least. It's just a little bit more clunky, I find. Now, the next set of units here, third most important, are your Vikings. Anti-air is extremely important when you're using Mech, and that's why you need Vikings to have their very own hotkey. You cannot simply lump Vikings in with other things. It just doesn't work. You need to target fire certain things with your Vikings that you may not want to target fire with your other units. And that's why having your Vikings on a separate hotkey, in this case 3, is so advantageous. I can move them around while my Main army stays stationary. Attack, I can land them or pick them up. It's very easy. They don't interfere with other Hotkeys, such as your siege tanks, and that just makes this a heck of a lot better. Now, you'll notice that I also have these leftover units here. I've got some Thors, I've got some Hellions. These sort of leftover units that don't really have spells that are used very often. I mean, obviously, the Thor does have the 250mm strike cannon, but, I mean, when's the last time you used that? So, I like to just keep these on my main hotkey. And when I say main hotkey, what I mean is that I have my hotkey 1 as my entire army. This is a hotkey of everything. And to quickly do that, what you want to do is hold Control and Shift on your keyboard, then click. Actually, let me just exit. So, you'll Control, Shift, click one unit of one type, in this case Siege Tank, then click one Viking, that gets all the Vikings, click one Thor, click one Hellion, click one Ghost, and if you have a Raven as well, which is unlikely, click one Raven. Now you've got everything on one, so just, you know, you can then just quickly, even while you're holding Shift still, you can go ahead and tap one. And now you'll have your entire army on one hotkey, able to move it around quite nicely here, maybe take out some destructible rocks. It's all very well and good. Of course, when you have everything on one hotkey, what will happen is your highest tech unit is going to be defaulted. So in this case, it looks like the siege tanks are defaulted. Typically, it's the Raven. Yeah, there we go. The Raven or Ghost will be the unit that is selected, so to speak, when you're using the hotkey 1. So you can easily move around as such. Siege tanks if you need to. And just, it's overall very good, I think, to have everything on one hotkey. Makes maneuvering your army quite efficient. Now, there's another way to sort of get everything on that hotkey, and what you do there is you will hold Shift while you drag boxes across everything. Now, for a mech army, I don't really suggest this, because typically if you have a really big mech army, you're going to have units spread out everywhere. I mean, I'm sure you've played mech before if you're, you know, fans of my channel. What typically happens here is you're going to have units all over the big, all over a huge map. You're going to have a gigantic siege line, and that just makes things a little bit clunky if you're going to want to hotkey your whole army. So, if this were the case, if I had an army spread out like this over a huge area, it's going to be extremely inefficient for me to box everything like this. It's just not good for mech. This can work for a marine tank or bio though, so it's up to you. I do prefer the Control Shift method, and you click one of each unit. Or the other option that you have is right before you move out of your base, you can simply clump everything up in one little spot here and cheat your way into an easy box like such, and that's pretty good. But obviously if you're on the battlefield, that's a completely different story. You never want to have your mech army in a state like this. This is just asking to get owned by Colossi or Banelings, or, you know, even Speedlings if your tanks aren't sieged up. So that's the general rundown of how you sort of, you know, go about hotkeying your mech army. There's other specific things that I think are kind of important to discuss here. One would be how you siege your tanks. Generally speaking, you only want to siege everything at once if you know he's about to engage and you're kind of in a bit of a rush. If I'm just moving my army around like this and I want to siege tanks, I'm going to simply drag over the tanks I want to siege and hit E as they move. So as you can see, this will siege up some tanks at a time, giving you a nice siege line. This is the kind of siege line you're going to want to have in a Terran versus Protoss. In a Terran versus Zerg, you'll obviously want your siege tanks more, not so tiered like this. So that's an easy way to siege your tanks. Obviously, if you have Thors, you don't have them on one hotkey by themselves, so you're going to have to control click your Thors and bring them up to the front to defend your tanks. This is something you'll notice I struggled with in my last Master League Quest episode. Definitely something I'm going to have to take more care of in the future. Also, because you have your Ghosts on hotkey 4, you can easily move them up to the very front of your army. Assume that the Protoss will come from this direction. And this way, you know, you can have these Ghosts up here, and you're not moving your entire army around to control your Ghosts, which is something you will see a pro gamer do every once in a while. Obviously, they have much better micro than I do, and are able to pull this off. But if you're a sort of inaccurate clicker like me, this is definitely how you're going to want to go about it. This way you can simply EMP as much as you want. Oh, wow. Let me just do that again. Ah, I see. This is the first time I've actually EMP'd on the new patch, so By the way, just as a side note, I do love the fact that they reduced the radius of EMP. I thought that it was just way too easy to EMP an entire Protoss ball before. Similarly with Infestors. So this should be pretty good, actually. I'm really looking forward to playing some games on the new patch. But anyway, this does sort of conclude my Mech Hotkey tutorial. I might have some more Mech micro tutorials in the future, which would be sort of a first-person view of myself engaging armies with my Mech. This is something that I think a lot of people don't know about. It's something you have to do. It just involves things like target firing with siege tanks, make sure you use stutter step Hellions, keeping Thors in the front, Viking control, Ravens, Ghosts, all that good stuff. That should be coming in another tutorial at a different time. So I hope you enjoyed this one. I do hope you learned something. And you know what, guys? Just please leave a comment if there's any suggestions you have for future videos, aside from Master League, because I know you guys love that. Just tell me what you want to see, and I will definitely get that out for you. So thanks for watching, guys. Peace out.